Okay, so for today I've got some good news and I've got some bad news. We're going to start with the bad news. The bad news is this: doing more EMOMs is not going to get you better at CrossFit. Doing more work isn't going to always get you better. There is a certain level of that does occur, especially when you're a beginner. But as you get into things a little bit deeper, you're not going to be able just to perform more work just to improve your results. Okay, so that's the bad news. Now onto the good news. The good news is I'm going to explain how you go through training for competitive CrossFit, how you start to conceptualize training, how to start to view it, and then how we can change things as we get a little bit more into it so that we can maximize your results. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start things off, because the first thing that people tend to do when they start competitive training in CrossFit is they start to compartmentalize their training and they start to view it as separate little entities that make up one big picture. So we've got, say, weightlifting, we've got gymnastics, we've got endurance, and then we've also got CrossFit. Now this isn't a model, this isn't, me trying to push that these are the only 4 things you need to focus on or anything like that, but we're just going to use these to represent how someone compartmentalizes their training and how someone can separate it. And then we're going to put a circle around each one, and that circle and that surface area is going to represent the amount of adaptation that someone can produce from it, okay? So I do a weightlifting program, my clean and jerk goes up 5 kilos. I do an endurance program, my 2K road time comes down. I do a gymnastics program, my 30 muscle ups for time comes down. And then I do CrossFit Metcons and I do benchmark workouts. And then all of a sudden my ability in those more sports specific scenarios increases. Now quite often what ends up happening is that people can start doing this and they start layering their training and it produces results at the start. So I'm going to use this red circle to go around it to represent people when they start their journey. So the red circle can draw upon the surface area of each one as much as possible. Now, if someone continues being this red circle, and this red circle, just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and then these training components get bigger and bigger and bigger, then, obviously someone is going to get better. Now, that isn't really the case. It is the case if someone is genetically gifted or if someone is taking performance-enhancing drugs, but the majority of people aren't, and the majority of people have full-time jobs and are trying to manage and juggle a couple of different other things, so that circle just gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and then I'm going to use this blue circle to represent what actually occurs. So this blue circle is someone who's been doing CrossFit and competitive CrossFit for about 2 years, because that's when things start to slow down a little bit. Now, how do we get this bigger? How do we make this better? We can improve lifestyle factors so that we can adapt to training a little bit better. That's going to be reducing stress. That's going to be eating better. That's going to be sleeping more. That's not necessarily about trying to increase the size of these circles, okay? Because what ends up happening quite often is you get people, okay, I'm going to go from training once a day to training twice a day, but in order to do that, I'm only going to get 6.5 hours sleep, which is frankly ridiculous because you're not going to be able to adapt to the training. So you're literally just, walking over money at that point. So the blue circle, how do we get that bigger? We improve our lifestyle and we try to make sure that we get as much as we can from each training component as we go through it. And then the second way that we can maximize our results is by manipulating each of these in a more individualized approach so that the person can adapt from it. Now, there's only so many times you can do the Russian squat program and make it work. Doing the Russian squat program for your back squat, okay, it works, great. You take a couple of weeks off, you do it for your front squat, great, it works. But you can't continue doing that. You're not going to be able to adapt at the same rate. So you need to now start to manipulate it, and you need to now start figuring out ways of making someone better. If someone always gets tendinitis every single time they go through a squat program that increases their squat volume to squat frequency to twice per week, then we need to make sure that we avoid that, because that's then going to cause stress, which doesn't allow them to perform their CrossFit work. If we know someone performs well with long, slow distance work, and that allows them to increase their training volume, but then as soon as they do high threshold aerobic work, that then takes a negative effect on their CrossFit, then we need to figure out, okay, how can we manipulate this where they're still getting as many results as possible through their endurance training, but they're not affecting their CrossFit. So individualizing your training is about manipulating these training components so they can fit in this blue circle a little bit more. And then that is exactly how that we can improve ourselves. So we're going to go through protocols to improve our lifestyle, and you can see this with professional CrossFit athletes. You know, a prime example being Brent Fikowski, who's recently just become a full-time CrossFit athlete. He has changed his lifestyle. He is making his blue circle bigger so he can adapt to his training. And then we can also see the same from someone who goes from a blog program, so someone who follows, I'm not going to name any, but just one of the blog programs out there, which is very, very general. Yeah, they get better at certain things, but that just increase in volume and in intensity isn't always going to make them get those results. So then they seek a coach and they say, hey, I need help with this. I need an objective view about how to perform my training, what I need to do to get better. So you need to make sure that you get in your blue circle as big as possible. You know, eat your greens, make sure you're getting enough protein and carbohydrate in your diet. Don't restrict yourself. You know, if you want to be lean, but then you can't perform as well, then you probably need to have a little bit of a conversation with yourself to figure out which one's more important. So we get that blue circle a little bit bigger, and then what we try to do is make sure that we manipulate all of these so that they can fit in there a little bit more. And then we also figure out, okay, which one do we actually need more work on as well? And that's a big part of individualized training too. I hope it helps. Sorry, EMOMs, more volume, more hard work, more inspirational, you know, Instagram quotes and stuff like that isn't really going to work, but hopefully this gives you an idea of how you can make things a little bit better for you and for your training.